I recently got back into playing more Marvel Rivals with my wife Jill, and it made me think about some characters and different storylines in ways I hadn't thought about before. Particularly Avengers Age of Ultron, and I'll tell you why. But when I was playing this game and looking back at the film, I started looking at Ultron specifically as a villain. And it looks like this could have been something that translated perfectly into a high production, high effort video game. You have an awesome roster of Avengers going up against a villain who is essentially AI, who can make an endless number of himself, perfect for games, and also take over any technology that he can get his hands on. He can create new bodies, he can communicate through the things that he's created, and if you destroy one version of Ultron, it doesn't necessarily mean that Ultron is gone forever. And yet, even though Age of Ultron came out more than a decade ago in movie form, we've never really gotten that big, dedicated Avengers game that takes that concept and goes all in on it. And before somebody says, hey look, Lego Marvel's Avengers did this, yes, I know that that game exists. It's actually a game that I like. A lot of the community did not like that game. And I think Lego games are great at adapting movies in that way. I wish they'd do it more often now, outside of just Star Wars. So I'm not acting like Age of Ultron has never been used, but what I mean is Marvel really needs to take Ultron and commit to a major Avengers video game with Ultron as the central villain. I think you could very easily create an amazing game around this, but I do have a question of the day for you, which is, if you could choose one villain to be the main threat of a full Avengers video game, who would you choose? Why would you choose them? Let me know. So why did Marvel Rivals make me think of this? Well, the thing that made me actually deep dive into this concept is because right now when I record this at around the end of August 2026, there was a PvE mode built around Avengers Age of Ultron. And somehow I actually completely missed this when it first came out. I don't know if I just wasn't paying attention to marketing or what it was, but I didn't really know it was a thing at all. And you get the Avengers team from that period in the MCU, so you have characters like Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, Hulk, Black Widow, Hawkeye, and Scarlet Witch, and essentially Ultron is launching a massive attack on Avengers Tower, trying to flood the tower with Sentries and take over the systems and network in order to then gain access to the entire world. So it kind of combines the lore and the imagery and the world of Marvel Rivals into the MCU in this way. It's not a straight up adaptation, but it is using those materials to make a fun game mode. And you're fighting waves of Ultron Sentries. It becomes absolutely crazy as they blitz the tower, and Ultron is communicating to you through these Sentries as you're completing different objectives, leveling up your characters, unlocking new abilities. And there are sections where you're defending Friday in the server core. There are different areas of Avengers Tower that you go through. And the thing is, I had a lot of fun with this game mode. Now, it's obviously not perfect at all. Like, if you're watching the gameplay, it is chaotic. And when you start getting in harder difficulties, like, the actual hard mode, some of the Ultron Sentries are really bullet spongy. So if somebody on your team doesn't contribute or they quit, it can become really difficult, sometimes just undoable, because it's meant for 4 people. It also can become repetitive. So I'm not here trying to say this is the perfect Age of Ultron game. What I'm trying to say though is that I don't think the mode had to be perfect to show that a PvE style game could work with Ultron. And I think this is kind of the proof is in the pudding, along with a few other things they've done. Now, unfortunately, I discovered this at the worst possible time. I've also had a very bad ear infection and some illness problems that led to this video getting delayed. So this currently is scheduled to go away on August 27th of this year. I hope that it comes back. It's part of their Road to Doomsday game modes, just like we're doing our Descent to Doomsday Marvel look back on this channel and Degenerate Plays, which is what this video is a part of. But unfortunately, if you're watching this when I upload it, you have a few days left to go try this if you want. That's why I wanted to get it out while this still exists. But more than this game mode being some kind of masterpiece, what I think it does is gives proof that Ultron could work very well for a game villain. You know, if you describe Age of Ultron in the most generic way possible from the film, it sounds like a video game that people would make fun of. There's an evil robot, the evil robot wants to take over the world, the evil robot will create thousands of different copies of itself and you fight them. I understand that it sounds extremely generic, I'm not lost on that point. But when you think about what kind of villain an Avengers game would need, and the amount of villains that you would need to fight without them just being generic soldiers, I think Ultron works perfectly for this concept. Because you have people like Hulk, Thor, Scarlet Witch, they're extremely powerful, right? You have Iron Man, he can fly around through the sky, basically nuke things from above. You need a villain for a game like that these characters can fight in numbers without constantly being like, hey, why did the Avengers kill 6,000 people here and nobody cared? You know, why did the Avengers just wipe out a small town worth of thugs and everyone's just like, yay, Avengers? Basically, you need a villain that they can fight, and Ultron very easily can be that. Hulk can smash these things into pieces without wondering why random people survive everything he throws at them. You know, Thor can blast lightning right through a robot, and that's okay, right? You don't even have to worry about gore here. You can kind of do whatever you want with this sort of villain. And I think one of the biggest problems games have had when they try to do something like this is that the enemies become anonymous. Think back to the Marvel Avengers game. They're throwing robots at you, they're throwing AIM soldiers at you. They are all just anonymous characters that you don't care. You know, if I'm fighting a random AIM robot, it's an AIM robot. It has no personality. But an Ultron Sentry is Ultron. He can speak through them. You can get characterization through those small mobs of villains that don't just have to necessarily be a generic nobody. That is still the main boss of the game that you would be fighting. And Ultron would be watching the Avengers through the Sentries. He could be talking to you, taunting you through them. That's interesting to me. I think that would be very interesting and solve a huge problem that the Avengers game had that originally came out. Because Ultron is intelligent and extremely intelligent, allowing him to have a personal relationship with the Avengers because you're essentially fighting one villain the entire time, even though it would feel like thousands. You know, that's why I was thinking about Marvel's Avengers and I went back and revisited it. There were a lot of problems it had, and one of the biggest was there was just the occasional named villain, but probably 99% of the characters that you fought were generic. They were just an AIM soldier, an AIM robot. They had no personality. You don't hear anything about or from them. No flavor text, nothing. You know, I don't hate Marvel's Avengers as much as some people do. You know, when I went back to it, there are things that I actually do like the costume selection and certain things like that. But the fact that the enemies are all just generic is a huge, huge letdown that I had no idea, thinking about it, how boring that makes a video game feel in terms of its gameplay loop without having personality in those villains. You know, you get recognizable villains that are bosses in Marvel's Avengers, but that's about it. And you know, I don't think the lesson here from Marvel's Avengers is, well, the Avengers shouldn't fight robots. Because I'm doing that in Marvel Rivals, and I'm actually having a lot of fun. This ties overall, though, into more of the MCU itself, because I was thinking about the MCU and how there were these older Marvel movie games. They were all over the place in terms of scale, quality, everything. But I don't think that necessarily we needed to throw out the baby with the bathwater here. Like, we didn't necessarily need to get rid of the MCU entirely and all of the ideas from it entirely in terms of video games. I think some of these games showed that you could do something with it. Because even though the MCU kept getting bigger and bigger, they basically threw those games out, and they threw out the idea of MCU games entirely. We did still get something like Lego Marvel's Avengers, which covered some of that storyline, but in general, when it got to things like Iron Man 3, Thor 2, Captain America 2, they went with mobile games, which I think is why we never saw an Avengers Age of Ultron adaptation outside of what Lego did. However, it's really just ripping lines pretty much straight from the movie, ripping music pretty much straight from the movie, not really doing much experimentation, just kind of doing a, hey look, here's the movie, play it and have fun. And that's fine. That was a fun game. But I look also at something like Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. I look at the storyline, and they actually really did try to incorporate Ultron into it, and I thought it was interesting. And it's very important to the core of that game's story. So Marvel isn't unwilling to use Ultron entirely, but I don't think they've really gone full in on a full Avengers game with a budget, an actual budget, where Ultron is the main villain, his army is an extension of himself, and you design the game around what makes that character and the team interesting. I don't think Lego or Marvel vs. Capcom are really going full in on that. They're just entirely different games that weren't trying to address that sort of design. But look at Marvel's Avengers again. If it had used Ultron this way, instead of going with things like MODOK and AIM, you could have had a roster of Avengers, and they could have still had different Marvel villains working with Ultron, teaming up with him. You could have had other factions if you want, so it's not just Ultron, but Ultron could have been that primary personality. Now, instead of aimless AIM soldiers, didn't even plan that one, you have a face and a voice and a personal relationship tied to the core enemy of the game. I think that's something that's far better than what that game ever accomplished. And Ultron could have adapted over time. Maybe he starts building stronger sentries over time. Maybe he starts getting into more technology and they have to go off the grid or lock down. And now, all of a sudden, this little Marvel Rivals mode that just feels like a wave-based shooter PvE thing, it suddenly starts to make you think, yeah, this character could be huge in a video game. And that's ultimately why I'm personally glad that I was able to experience the Marvel Rivals mode before it disappeared, because it's not perfect, it's certainly repetitive, it's not the Age of Ultron game that I'm describing here, but for a little bit, I could experience that sort of fantasy of playing through Avengers Tower, fighting the Ultron Sentries, being taunted by the man himself. I thought that was really interesting, and it really makes me wish that Marvel would have taken this idea further when Age of Ultron was originally new, and it does make me wish that they would maybe go back to the drawing board and consider this villain for a full-size Avengers game. It's just too bad because there is a lot here that they could work with to make a fantastic game. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video, you want to leave a like, subscribe, I appreciate that so much. I love having you here. As part of our descent to Avengers Doomsday, I thought this would be a fun look back at the past and the present at the same time. And if you want to support us, we actually played through Marvel's Avengers over on Degenerate Plays quite a bit back. That is our Let's Play style channel in the description down below. We have all of our other channels in our link tree. And then we do also have our own store, CosmoBunny.shop, where you can support us, where we have coasters, keychains, trays, and more, where we believe in celebrating the past and turning it into something new and transformative now by taking comics, magazines, other books that have been damaged, taking that paper, using resin, and turning it transformatively into something new for your home today. You can use code DJAY123 for 10% off your first purchase over there. Have a fantastic day, and as always, everyone, stay shway.